Poštovani gledalci, dobrodošli u emisiju Granice Istoka. Ja sam Harun Karčić. Oružana grupa Islamska država Irak i Levant, poznata kao ISIL ili Daesh, teritorijalno i vojno je poražena u selu Baghuz u sirijskoj pokrajini Der Ezur. Time se okončala skoro 5-godišnja međunarodna borba protiv te grupe. Borba koja je na istu stranu stavila Sjedinjene Američke Države i Iran. Uprkos teritorijalnom porazu, analitičari smatraju da će ISIL-ova ideologija i dalje živjeti. Ali za brojne vlade širom svijeta pojavio se novi problem. Šta uraditi sa zarobljenim članovima ISIL-a, njihovim porodicama i djecom? Primiti ih nazad ili im zabraniti ulaz?
Mnogi su prvi put za grupu ISIL čuli tek prije nekoliko godina. 2014. Abu Bekr al-Bagdadi stao je za govornicu. U 1000 godina staroj mosulskoj velikoj džamiji Al-Nuri proglasio je uspostavu, kako je naveo, islamske države koja se prostire na velikim dijelovima Iraka i Sirije. 4 godine kasnije borci ISIL-a eksplozivom su uništili džamiju. Područje je bilo posljednje uporište grupe koja se suočavala sa iračkom vojskom. Ubrzo su iračke snage preuzele kontrolu nad Mosulom, koji je nezvanično važio za glavni grad samoproglašene države. Prošle godine u julu irački premijer Hajder al-Abadi ušao je u Mosul i proglasio pobjedu nad ISIL-om. Ali grad koji su on i njegove snage napustili ostao je u ruševinama. Više od 90% zapadnog dijela starog grada u Mosulu uništeno je u 9-mjesečnoj ofanzivi iračkih snaga podržanih koalicijom predvođenom SAD-om. Operacija je ocijenjena kao najveća urbana borba nakon Drugog svjetskog rata. Godinu kasnije tijela poginulih civila i boraca ISIL-a i dalje se nalaze među ruševinama grada. Mnogi su i dalje opasani prslucima sa eksplozivom, neeksplodiranim bombama i ručnim granatama. U nekim građevinama je moguće živjeti, ali nema osnovnih uvjeta kao što su voda i struja. Nedostaje i zdravstvena njega, a mali su izgledi za pronalazak posla.
Gdje god da odiješ, na sve strane su ruševine. Nemoguće je dovesti porodice ovdje kad sve podsjeća na smrt.
Prema procjenama, 700.000 osoba je raseljeno. Mnogi su u kampovima, a nisu rijetki ni oni koji žive u ruševinama. Među njima je i veliki broj djece. Iz organizacije Save the Children navode da su djeca u Mosulu progonjena konstantnim strahom i tugom. Upozoravaju na novu izgubljenu generaciju podložnu iskorištavanju. ISIL je provodio nezamisliv 3-godišnji teror po cijelom, kako su ga nazvali, kalifatu, uključujući i do tada historijski i religijski raznolik grad Mosul. Rekonstrukcija tek treba da počne. Donatori su obećali svega 30% od procijenjenih 88 milijardi dolara potrebnih za obnovu. U međuvremenu nezadovoljstvo raste. Sada je usmjereno prema vladi i snagama koje su došle da ih oslobode, a koje su ih, kako se čini, sada napustile. Amina Gvozden, Al Jazeera.
Dok ih mnoge države odbijaju, Čečenija je jedna od rijetkih zemalja koje imaju program repatriacije povratnika sa stranih ratišta i njihove reintegracije u društvo.
Za Gidat je 3. put bila trudna kada su njezina obitelj i ona prešli tursku granicu i pridružili se ISIL-u. Kaže, privukle su ih snimke na kojima je ISIL prikazan kao zemlja čistog islama, ali umjesto toga dočekalo ih je mučenje, rat i ugnjetavanje. U strahu od odmazde ne želi pokazati lice.
Tamo je bilo mnogo nepravde, mnogo zla. Ne samo da su mučili one koji nisu bili iz ISIL-a, nego i udovice koje su tamo živjele. Zato se sve raspalo. Ne možete se nazivati islamskom državom, a činiti ono što je nespojivo s islamom.
Nakon muževe smrti uspjela je kontaktirati čečenske vlasti. Vraćena je kući i uključena u program deradikalizacije. Među posljednjim je ženama kojima je dozvoljeno da se vrate. Ruska vlada sada vraća samo djecu. Mnogi od stotina očajnih roditelja koji u Čečeniju dolaze iz cijele Rusije traže od vlasti da vrate njihove kćeri.
Sve je teže gajiti nadu jer već 3 godine ne znamo ništa o njima.
Fatima je posljednji put telefonski razgovarala sa svojom kćeri u veljači 2017. Tada su Rezeda i njezinih 5 djece bili u Mosulu.
Nadamo se da će vlada tim djevojkama pružiti priliku da se vrate svojim majkama. Ako se pronađu, ako su još žive, država i društvo bi im trebali pomoći da žive u normalnim uvjetima.
Organizacija koja lobira za njihov povratak ima dokumentaciju o više od 700 ruskih državljanki i 1500 djece koji se još vode kao nestali.
Naravno da smo zabrinuti. Bilo je žena koje su očajnički htjele da odu u ISIL, ali one su sada među prvima koje su odatle bežale. Sada mogu ovdje da dođu samo ilegalno, ali ako ih vratimo kroz program i pod strogim nadzorom specijalnih službi, bit će manje opasne.
Muškarci povratnici s bojišta poslani su u zatvor, ali ženama je dan novac i odgovarajući smještaj. Čečenski program rehabilitacije žena koje su bile u ISIL-u iznenadio je mnoge. Čečenski lider Ramzan Kadirov poznat je po nepokolebljivim stavovima i postupcima. Neočekivan pristup u regiji poznatoj po oštrom i često nasilnom djelovanju prema navodnim ekstremistima. Politiku vraćanja žena i djece s bivših ISIL-ovih teritorija neki smatraju načinom da Kadirov popravi imidž kršitelja ljudskih prava, ali i da spriječi moguće napade, te se etablira kao vođa ovdašnjih muslimana. Heda Saratova sada nastoji uvjeriti vlasti da vrate još žena. Unatoč kritikama da pomaže onima koji su se pridružili organizaciji, zabranjenoj u Rusiji, rehabilitaciju smatra najsigurnijom opcijom. Zbog toga je jedina nada roditeljima koji nastoje ponovno vidjeti svoju djecu. Uz roditelje iz Rusije, njezinu pomoć su zatražili i roditelji iz Njemačke.
Idemo sada do Istanbula gdje se nalazi Oubai Shahbandar, sigurnosni analitičar i stručnjak za Bliski istok. Mr. Oubai Shahbandar, hello and welcome to the Al Jazeera Balkans channel. Now, ISIL has been militarily defeated in Syria and Iraq, but the group seems to have already evolved into a covert network. Do you see the possibility of their military resurgence if pressure against them is not sustained?
I think we have to keep a close eye on Daesh. I think there's no question that from a territorial perspective, the so-called caliphate of Daesh has certainly been destroyed. That is no longer posing the same type of threat on an international level that it once did. But there's a new phase here. We're entering into a new phase of the struggle against Daesh, and it's the type of extremism that allowed Daesh and such extremist groups to rise in the first place to the degree that in which they did. Daesh's strategy here is very simple. They're going underground. They're operating now as a guerrilla terror insurgent group. They've lost control of their so-called capital. They used to control territory almost the size of the UK between Syria and Iraq, 30% of the territory in those countries. Now they are down to nothing. But that doesn't mean that Daesh operatives don't still exist. We have to look at for example, where has the Daesh's core leadership gone? And what is going to happen to the thousands of Daesh prisoners that are now captured by the US-led coalition and their local partners on the ground? So there's still a lot of questions on whether a Daesh 2.0 or whether a Daesh 3.0 may arise once again. We have to look at the conditions on the ground that allowed Daesh to become the terror threat in which it became, and whether or not those conditions are existing on the ground today that would allow Daesh to somehow revive itself from the point of territorial defeat. We certainly do know that Daesh certainly has these ambitions, that they're still launching car bomb attacks, hit-and-run attacks, and assassination attacks. So we have to look at Daesh now as a underground terror guerrilla group. So they may have been defeated territorially, but their ideology and their ambitions still remain.
Mm-hmm. Now, some analysts have warned that defeating ISIL would be the easy part, but that defeating their ideology would take a very strenuous effort. What's your take on that, and how effective have these various de-radicalization programs in Europe and the USA have been so far?
Well, we have to first look at the history here of Daesh's history. Its predecessor, Al-Qaeda in Iraq and the Islamic State of Iraq, eventually grew into where Daesh is today. So on the operational front and on the ideological front, you have to fight these type of terror threats. I mean, let's be honest here. Through both the silent and active participation, the Assad regime allowed these extremists to thrive in prisons and eventually release them. So Daesh was able to expand significantly because of the active complicity of corrupt regimes like the Assad regime, and frankly, through corruption in Baghdad as well. On the ideological front, that's absolutely very crucial. Daesh certainly was able to recruit thousands of foreign fighters from Western Europe, from Southern Europe, and from the Balkans, and from Central Asia. What's going to happen to them now? We're looking at potentially over 1,000 foreign fighters that are still alive, that are still being held by the U.S.-led coalition in northeastern Syria. Are they going to be released? Are they going to be released back into the wild, into Syria, into Iraq? Are they going to escape? Will Western Europe and the Central Asian states take responsibility for their citizens? There's also a number of Russian Federation citizens that were key leaders in Daesh and other extremist groups operating in Syria and Iraq. So that's a very important question here, because these Western European countries and the Assad regime allowed a number of these foreign fighters to operate freely for a number of years. So now, if we're going to find a true sustainable solution against Daesh, we have to figure out a true policy solution, cooperation between the Western European states, Central Asia, and the Russian Federation on what's going to happen to these foreign fighters that have been captured, and how can they prevent this type of radicalization that occurred almost in open grounds with everyone. I mean, the recruitment happened online, the recruitment happened in universities, it happened in small towns, it happened in large towns. So we have to look at the conditions that allowed Daesh to rise in the first place. So a significant amount of responsibility now has to be placed on European states, on the Russian Federation, and frankly on the Assad regime to prevent the type of both malevolent actions and the significant amount of corruption and incompetence that allowed this radicalization to take place. Thousands of foreign fighters flowing into Syria and into Iraq as a result. You cannot talk about the defeat of Daesh without a policy solution in these countries that prevents this type of radicalization to happen in the first place.
Why is it so difficult for European countries to come up with a common plan on how to deal with former fighters? And how is Turkey dealing with its own fighters? We know that a small number of them have joined ISIL or Daesh in the past.
That's a very good question. I mean, let's look at the United Kingdom here. I mean, we've seen a significant amount of hesitance by London to take back some of the foreign fighters that were fighting on behalf of Daesh in eastern Syria. These foreign fighters in particular were responsible for the most gruesome executions of journalists and of Syrian civilians and Iraqi civilians. So is the United Kingdom's intelligence and security services going to take responsibility? And more importantly, this type of recruitment was happening, again, it was not happening covertly. Many people knew about it, but the type of laws that were on the books and the type of the political situation in the United Kingdom did not allow for an aggressive response to prevent this type of radicalization from leading into a mass outflow, hundreds of fighters, of foreign fighters into Syria and Iraq. So it's really a question of political will in London, and also, of course, in Moscow. We saw a significant amount of Russian Federation citizens and their families going into Syria and Iraq, really strengthening the ranks of Daesh on a number of levels. So now the question is there the political will, the political capital to learn from these mistakes of the past and take action now to prevent this type of radicalization from happening under everyone's eyes, and that could potentially allow a Daesh 3.0 to arise yet again.
Right, and finally, do you see the possibility of countries such as Libya, Afghanistan, or even Yemen, because of their existing social fragmentation and political anarchy, becoming the new epicenters of Daesh?
Well, failed states and the chaos arising from failed states is the perfect ingredient and the perfect catalyst for which Daesh is able to operate, and other extremist groups like Al-Qaeda, that allows them the necessary maneuver room, that allows them the necessary space to plot international terror attacks, to recruit, to extort, to establish a financial network. And that's what we've seen throughout the country, in the Sahel, in the southern Arabian Peninsula, and in Central Asia, where Daesh may be defeated in one territorial geographical area, but then it moves some of its fighters and personnel into the periphery in much more harder to reach areas. We saw that strategy in the extreme remote deserts of Iraq and Syria and the Badia. We saw that strategy also in the Sahel, in sub-Saharan Africa, and in southern Libya in the tri-border area. So this is the type of strategy that allows these terror groups to sustain their ability to regroup and rearm and resustain themselves despite a significant amount of territorial defeat and despite a number of their senior operatives being killed. That's what allowed them to regenerate over the years despite Al-Qaeda in Iraq's nominal defeat. And so we can certainly look to Daesh to regroup and to learn from its past mistakes and to learn from the lessons that allowed Daesh to operate and expand to other areas. So while Daesh may be defeated in Iraq and Syria for now, other extremist groups, to include affiliates of Daesh, are expanding in other parts of the world, from the southern Arabian Peninsula to sub-Saharan Africa.
Right. Oubai Shahbandar, it was a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Poštovani gledalci, bio je to Oubai Shahbandar, sigurnosni analitičar iz New America Foundation. Broj terorističkih napada širom svijeta opada iz godine u godinu, a broj žrtava terorizma najniži je od 2009. To su podaci Međunarodnog centra za analizu terorizma. Tokom 2018. taj centar je zabilježio ukupno 15.321 napad oružanih grupa širom svijeta, u kojima je poginulo 13.483 ljudi. Iako je broj napada u 2018. veći nego u 2017. broj žrtava se smanjio. Naime, prema podacima globalnog indeksa terorizma, 2017. je izvedeno 10.900 oružanih napada širom svijeta, u kojima je kumulativno poginulo 26.400 ljudi. Ovdje je važno napomenuti da broj oružanih napada i žrtava već četvrtu godinu zaredom bilježi konzistentan pad, budući da je vrhunac oružanog nasilja bila 2014. kada je izvedeno 17.000 napada širom svijeta, u kojima je poginulo 45.000 ljudi. Indikativan je i podatak da su teroristički napadi pretežno koncentrisani u regijama gdje već postoji visok stepen političkog nasilja. Više od pola svih napada izvedeno je u 4 države: u Iraku, Afganistanu, Indiji i Pakistanu. Istovremeno, više od pola svih žrtava stradalo je u Iraku, Afganistanu i Siriji. U nekoliko muslimanskih zemalja zabilježen je drastičan pad u oružanom nasilju 2017. godine u poređenju sa prethodnom godinom. Primjera radi, Turska je zabilježila pad za 67% u broju oružanih napada, Jemen za 57%, Saudijska Arabija za 56%, dok je Libija zabilježila pad od 55%. Drugim riječima, broj oružanih napada u tim državama, a time i broj žrtava, postepeno se smanjuje. U drugim zemljama ipak bilježi se rast u broju oružanih napada. Primjera radi, u Nepalu je zabilježen porast za 474%, u Kamerunu za 68%, u Mijanmaru za 55%, a u Keniji za 49%. Općenito gledajući, situacija se popravlja kada je riječ o političkom nasilju. Evo i nekoliko zanimljivih brojki. 2017. broj oružanih napada pao je za 27%. 94 države svijeta su zabilježile napredak vezano za pitanje sigurnosti, dok je 46 država zabilježilo nazadak. 99% žrtava oružanih napada poginulo je u zemljama koje već imaju visok stepen političkog nasilja. Drugim riječima, veoma je mali broj žrtava terorizma u mirnim zemljama Europske unije ili u SAD-u. Zapravo, od svih terorističkih napada u svijetu, svega 2,7% izvedeno je u zapadnoj Europi, a čak 1% u Sjedinjenim Američkim Državama. Naša naredna gošća je sigurnosna analitičarka i stručnjakinja za kontra-terorizam iz Haga, Renske Veer. Hello and welcome to the Al Jazeera Balkans channel. Now, Western countries are scrambling to figure out what to do with the thousands of their citizens who have joined ISIL. Syria and Iraq do not want them there, neither do their countries of origin. What should be done with former ISIL fighters and their families?
Well, for me, it's quite interesting to see that the discussion about this issue seems to focus on either repatriate these people or to keep them away from their countries from origin. But it's actually not an either or question, because in my opinion, ideally what we need is a case-to-case approach to these people. The reason why is because in some cases it is much better to have these people return in a controlled manner to their countries of origin. For instance, not to have them disappear from the radar from a security perspective. And in other instances, for instance, if somebody has a plan to commit an attack in the West, but not in the region of Iraq and Syria, it is much better to actually make sure that you keep them out. And what that needs is a policy line or a policy approach from EU governments that actually facilitates a case-to-case approach. And that's not the case at this point, because most policy lines in the European Union are very absolute. They are usually, we are not going to make any effort to repatriate these people at all. So that would be a problem.
Right. Now, Kurdish SDF officials have said that they don't have the resources to conduct trials on their territory. However, some European leaders have voiced their support for establishing an international tribunal, similar to that to the ICTY, which covered the former Yugoslavia. How necessary is it to have an international tribunal for crimes committed by ISIL fighters?
Well, let me start by saying that I think that prosecuting people for potentially very serious crimes that they might have committed in Syria or Iraq is a good thing. These crimes are serious. They sometimes contribute to genocide, at least war crimes. But the problem is that the establishment of a tribunal, whether it is in a region or in a different area, is a process of years. It's a very long political and diplomatic process. And as such, this is not an adequate answer to the more urgent security problem that we are faced with now. What we are faced with is a situation where if we don't act on the issue of foreign terrorist fighters that might be released by Kurdish forces, we might have a security problem. And the answer for that is not the long process of the establishment of tribunal.
Mm-hmm. Now, can and should former ISIL fighters be rehabilitated and reintegrated back into society?
Well, in all fairness, I think in the end we don't have a choice there, really, because in the end, whether we are able to prosecute them or not, they will need to be reintegrated in society, even when they are put behind bars for a long time, whether it is via a tribunal or in their home countries after prosecution. They will eventually return in society. So we need to prepare ourselves for that. And also, if we don't manage to reintegrate these people properly, we run the risk of them going underground, getting off the radar, us not being able to monitor their activities closely. So that's actually a much more dangerous scenario.
But how successful have these various de-radicalization efforts and programs been so far?
Yeah, it's really quite difficult to say because there's not been a lot of research done on the actual effectiveness of programs of de-radicalization. So not much is actually known of how efficient and effective they are. What we do know is that there are cases of successful de-radicalization. But de-radicalization is a very personal process. It involves a lot of personal drivers and factors. So it's not really a problem that can be solved by one program that is put in place for lots of people. So there goes the same thing as I said before. We need here as well an individual approach, a tailor-made approach to every and each person. And another point is, I think, that in order to make sure that we contain the risks that are posed by these people, we don't just have the tool of de-radicalization programs. We also have other ways of monitoring their behavior.
Such as?
Well, monitoring by, for instance, intelligence or police services in a covered manner. So there's an array of measures that can be taken. And once again, you need to look at each and every case, what measure would be most suitable.
Right. Renske, Veer, it was a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much for your time.
No problem. And thank you very much as well.
Thank you. Poštovani gledalci, bila je to Renske van der Veer, direktorica Međunarodnog centra za kontra-terorizam u Hagu. Za sad ne postoji konsenzus vezano za to kako tretirati bivše borce i porodice grupe ISIL, naročito strane državljane. Sirija i Irak ih ne žele sebi, a zapadne države, baš kao i bliskoistočne i centralnoazijske, ne žele ih primiti nazad. Hiljade poraženih boraca ISIL-a i članova njihovih porodica nalaze se u Siriji i Iraku gdje čekaju svoju sudbinu. Poštovani gledalci, bilo je to sve u ovom izdanju emisije Granice Istoka. Emisiju možete gledati i na našoj internetskoj stranici balkans.aljazeera.net. Hvala na pažnji.